had, let's see, I think Jeffrey has joined us. And I don't know if everyone, I know we have some difficulty connecting for some folks, but anyway, let's go ahead and get started. And Omar, take it away. What are we discussing this evening?
Okay, so this evening I picked one of the topics that we voted on. I was actually going to talk about something else, but it wasn't one that we voted on. And then after your fantastic presentation, I just got intimidated. But then I read, I read something that God loves me and it doesn't matter what, so I felt better. Anyway, I read something. Actually, I was on Mike Morell's page, and he had something about God loves you no matter what. So that made me feel better about myself.
Awesome. I don't even remember posting that, but okay, that's great.
And I always go to your website and I get inspired somehow, or I get intimidated. Either one. I'm thinking, man, I'm not that deep a thinker. But so today we're going to talk about fascism and how transhumanism or technology can help combat it. So let me see if I can share the screen. Host is disabled, participant screen sharing.
Oh, well, maybe I can undisable. Let's see. Who can share? Okay. All right. I think I've opened it up, so if you can give it a try.
Okay, let's try again. Desktop. Okay. Now let's see. Can everyone see my screen?
I do not see your screen.
No?
Nope.
Okay, hold on. Why isn't it? Okay. I don't see it.
Okay. It just said it just started showing.
Yep, we got it.
Can everyone see that slide?
Yeah, we see your whole I think whole like
Our desktop
document or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, let me I think I can do it. Okay, come on. Technology, man. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. Now, I want to apologize ahead of time. I was so obsessed with the election, I didn't have a lot of time to work on these slides, but that's my fault because I'm an election nerd. But fascism and how transhumanism can combat it. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Well, wait a minute. Okay. All right, we're going to get some definitions first. Don't go anyplace. So what is transhumanism? A philosophical, and I pulled this off of Wikipedia actually. A philosophical movement that advocates for transformation of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies able to greatly modify and enhance human intellect and physiology. Transhumanist thinkers study the potential benefits and dangers of emerging technologies that could overcome fundamental human limitations, as well as the ethical limitations of such technology. The most common transhumanist thesis, I don't necessarily agree with this, is that human beings may eventually be able to transform themselves into different beings with abilities so greatly expanded from current conditions as to merit the label of post-human beings. Now, since we're Christian, does anyone disagree with that definition first? Or want to add to it?
It seems kind of unnecessarily complex, but sure, the gist is there.
Yeah, I thought it was a little complex, but I'd rather make it too complex than too simplistic. At least I thought for the presentation. But
Not
you're right;
really.
it is a little bit overdone. But now, I want to add to this definition Christian transhumanists, because we are a Christian transhumanist society. And this I got from our website. Someone who advocates using science and technology to transform the human condition in a way that is consistent with and exemplified by the discipleship of Christ. So, let us move on. Okay. Now, I'm going to define a little bit more what I think the term Christian transhumanist means. And I love to use this scripture from Isaiah. For behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind. No more shall there be in it an infant that lives but a few days, or an old man that does not fill out his days. For the child shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat fruits. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be. My chosen shall live long. My chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. And to me, this encapsulates what I think Christian transhumanism is. And the reason I put this in is because it's important. Because to me, Christianity gives transhumanism a framework, an ethical framework to work off of, that we are building towards something, that we are striving towards something. And it's not just technology enhancement, it's human enhancement. It's the human life enhancement, that we should strive for a world that resemble, like the Lord's Prayer says, on earth as it is in heaven, that we should strive for that kind of world. Does anyone have any comments so far?
Love it.
Okay, let's continue. Let's talk about fascism. Now, I'm going to read this definition, and then I'm going to ask if anybody wants to add to it. Fascism is a form of far-right authoritarian ultranationalism characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and strong regimentation of society and the economy, which came to prominence early 20th century Europe. The first fascist movements emerged in Italy during World War I before spreading to other European countries. It is opposed to liberalism, Marxism, anarchism. Fascism is placed on the far right within traditional left-right spectrum. Walter LeCour, historian, sees the core tenets of fascism as self-evident: nationalism, social Darwinism, racialism, the need for leadership, a new aristocracy and obedience, and the negation of the ideals of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. Does anyone want to add to that or disagree with this definition?
As the one Italian here. Hi, kid.
Oh, here we go. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying I can confirm that this is how it played out.
Okay. All right, so let's go.
Could I make just one quick observation on that definition?
Let's go back. Go ahead.
It kind of stands out to me, the part where it talks about strong regimentation of society.
Yeah.
I wonder which of the other ideologies listed. It lists liberalism, Marxism, anarchism as different points along the traditional left-right spectrum. I wonder which of those or some other the author would use to categorize strong regimentation of society on the far left, which we're also seeing to some extent.
I have seen a diagram where it had two axes, one the right wing versus left wing, but the other the libertarianism versus statism. So I would classify the USSR and Nazi Germany both as highly statist societies. You know, or
Okay.
the strong centralization of power.
Okay. I don't know if I would consider maybe extreme liberalism might be, you might be able to say that kind of encourages that kind of strong regimentation of society. But I don't know if it's because in liberalism, you're just given an ethos, as opposed to fascism, where the ethos is forced upon you.
Well, I think communism, right, is closer to fascism in terms of like
Right
around like the ideology. And I think the socialism is on the spectrum, right, because they're still massively reorganizing resource allocation. So I wonder what would be the socialist equivalent, but on the right. Like, what is to fascism what socialism is to communism?
Would anybody like to try to answer that?
Well, I'm not sure what, I mean, all these terms acquire different shades of meaning, and that changes from country to country and from decade to decade. Like the word liberal in Australia means centre-right, because it's more like the classical liberal small government, and whereas the word liberal in America means left-wing progressive and with tendencies towards authoritarianism. So, and
right, I think I think you're right. If we're talking about classical liberalism,
yeah,
then yes, that's a totally, because when I lived in Canada, liberalism had a meaning much like it did in Australia. And I just was shocked when I, heard, oh, this is the Liberal Party. And they were nothing like the liberals in the United States.
That's right. The Liberal Party in Australia is pretty much the Republican Party.
Right. So it's kind of a, but the important thing to realize when you're talking about fascism, I think one of the things is the ultranationalism. And that's something that's why a lot of people have looked at the 4 years of Trump and have used words like fascism, even though what's happening with Trump really doesn't fall under fascism, at least not yet. It's now you do have the hints of ultranationalism. Now, for example, in Alabama, where I live, I have a candidate, Tommy Tuberville, who was elected to Senate, who says, I want to arrest anybody who burns the American flag. Now, it's obvious that he hasn't studied any constitutional law, because this has already been adjudicated in the courts. You can burn the flag if you want. You're not going to get arrested for that. So for him to say that is kind of disturbing. But it's that ultra-nationalist element that kind of shapes everything else, that shapes the regimentation of society and the dictatorial powers, because it's all under the guise of we're protecting our homeland, or or in the case of Germany, for example, you're protecting the fatherland.
Yeah, I think this is where the left right meaning sort of breaks down a little bit.
Yeah,
Hitler self-identified as a socialist and talked about a workers' paradise and put workers on the boards of companies and things. There was a strange mix of extreme left and extreme right to the point where it's hard to tell the difference. So I think,
but it's interesting how he attacked communism.
He did, and the union,
which made it very interesting to know that he was for workers' rights, but yet he didn't like the Marxists.
That's why he was a national socialist. So the expectation of communism was that nations would fade away, and that governments would fade away. I talked about the withering away of the state, whereas Hitler said, I want national socialism. It's almost the same as what China says. We want socialism with Chinese characteristics. It was socialism with German characteristics and maintained.
Right, exactly.
And instead of the withering away of the state, which communism originally wanted, it saw an emergence of a powerful state.
Also, in the 1920s, Nazism had both left and right wing within the party.
Oops.
With the left wing being led primarily by Ernst Röhm of the stormtroopers. And in 1934, the right wing of the party, led by Hitler, basically did a purge of the left wing elements. They killed all the senior members of the SA and forced the rank and file to come into the main military. But the term socialism in the name of the party dates back to that period when we had both left and right.
Yeah.
Both left-wing nationalists and right-wing nationalists. And they were trying to appeal to both.
Right. So now that we have an idea of what we're talking about as far as fascism, I wanted to use as an example. Now, the country I'm going to use, and I've already kind of given it away, is not what I consider a purely fascistic country, but they have enough tendencies that they can serve as an example of how a country with those kind of tendencies can use technology for bad and how you can combat it. But first, China. Let's talk about China. China and the use of technology to oppress. The Chinese government has been convinced, and this is from an article from The Atlantic, the Chinese government has been convinced that a far greater degree of social control is both necessary and possible. It now has access to a set of tools for managing the complexity of contemporary life that it believes will deliver better, surer, and more reliable results than anything produced by the model of order from below. So, the system that China uses is called social credit. Now, this is from The Atlantic, an article from The Atlantic. This system is designed to reach into every corner of existence, both online and off. It monitors each individual consumer's behavior, conduct on social network, real-world infractions like speeding tickets or quarrels with your neighbor. Then it integrates them into a single algorithmic, I'm pronouncing it wrong, algorithmically determined sincerity score. Every Chinese citizen receives a literal numeric index of their trustworthiness and virtue. It's almost like a credit score. And this index unlikes, well, everything, in principle anyway. This one number will determine the opportunities citizens are offered, the freedoms they enjoy, and the privilege they grant. Now, how does this work in real life? The Chinese state, and I'm sorry, I don't know why the text came out this way. The Chinese state relies upon private enterprise to implement social credit. So how does this work? And extend its tentacle reach. Top tier concerns like Alibaba, Alipay, Tencent, Baidu, the mobility on demand services, Didi Chunks, massively popular dating sites, Bali either contribute significant elements to the system's architecture or incorporate its ruling into their services. The propensity to spend hours playing online games become an index of indiscipline in and of itself, even if the person playing them is debt-free and has a clean record otherwise. Excuse me, what? One's brand of smartphone serves as a stand-in for social class, while routine purchases of diapers are taken as an indication that one is a parent, therefore likely to be responsible. All of these qualities are factored in determining what score is ultimately rewarded. So here, if any of you are familiar, for example, with the book 1984, China is building a structure that basically determines which citizens are good and which citizens are not. And when I saw this and I read this, I was terrified. Because they're using technology that we have in our country against its own citizens. Now, does anyone want to chime in at this point?
I wanted to jump in and throw this. I mean, is this in some ways the way many people think of heaven and the rule of God, right? Like the book of life, or good deeds and bad deeds, kind of weighing out your evaluation, where you fall in the moral spectrum. Like, isn't that how a lot of people conceptualize what that is?
I'd say definitely from like a Confucian perspective, this is what heaven would look like, right? Like this hierarchy that brings about harmony. And the hierarchy is, objective, impartial, external, right? Because it's not like the social credit system is developed by the Chinese government, right? It's emergent from all these different indicators that come from like social behavior, right? So on one scale, you can be like really low on status. On one other scale, you can be really high on status. But I think very much like if you look at this year of Chinese development, like they're very comfortable with submission to some sort of external, like I think before they had a social credit system, they had the Confucian tests to identify bureaucracy, like who would get a job where, like you would literally take a test and it would send you to a different village. So I think it's, and when this was like, when you think about their spiritual experience and their religious kind of context, like they do think the vision for heaven is harmony brought about by order.
It's
I've got a
interesting.
question.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
A question for whoever might know more about this system than I do. How emergent is it really, and how centralized is the control of it really? And I guess my sense is that I would not be afraid of it at all if it were completely decentralized, but I would be terrified of it if there was a central power that could do whatever it wants to adjust the system.
Right. It's my impression from reading this article and some other ones that the government is implementing this from the top down. So this is not so unlike in the United States, where a lot of these, dating apps and other things are not really controlled by the government. The Chinese government has access to all this information and no one to tell it it can't.
That seems problematic because, privacy and self-sovereignty, things like that, kind of go out the window when you decide to let a very powerful centralized organization run the show on this sort of network.
Like, I feel like you're also alluding to some other powerful centralized organizations in our lives.
Yep, like Google and Facebook.
Just sense that in there somewhere.
Right. I think the difference is, and I'm not a fanboy of Google of Facebook, but I think the difference is there's much more transparency available, at least in our society, when it comes to Google and Facebook. You're not going to have Alibaba getting dragged in front of, the communist Politburo, whatever it is in China, unless they want to punish Alibaba. In other words, it's not a grassroots thing from China to punish these companies because the government dictates who gets to operate and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And the people have very little say in it. That's why China, to me, is a model of a fascistic type government that has control over advanced AI and uses it to their benefit.
So I'd propose that maybe simply authoritarianism is a more precise descriptor for what you're criticizing than fascism, because in this case, aren't they, wouldn't we more typically put China further on the left end of the spectrum?
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that China is fascistic, is a purely fascistic model. I would say it has enough tendencies that if it wanted to go in a more fascistic direction, it'd be very easy. I don't think it's there yet, but it has a lot of the indicators already and a lot of things in place that if it decided to go in that direction, it would not be that difficult.
It's fascism with Chinese characteristics. That's the way.
Yeah, that might be a better way of putting it.
Because they do believe in like their own version of racial supremacy, right? Like if you're not Han Chinese, like you have a high chance of ending up in a concentration camp, right? Like, but they do also have these Marxist things about like nobody owns land, like nobody owns property, right? Like, got to be hyper nationalistic as opposed to like the difference between the Soviet Union, I think, and China in this case is like the Soviet Union in their communism, they had a global view, right? Eventually, it will be the Soviet Union of all the free states, right? Like, all of the world. Whereas with China, it's like, no. Everybody will be under China because China is the conduit between heaven and earth. So it's
right. The one belt policy.
Yes, exactly.
All right, let's move on. Now, technology is a force of good. I know you thought I was just going to dump on technology all day. I want to use something that I've taken from the French Revolution. Now, stay with me for a minute. I understand the French Revolution had a lot of negatives, how it played out. Okay, so don't kill me yet. Liberty.
Is there one European? I'm triggered. I'm just kidding.
I understand, but just stay with me. Remember the three parts of the French Revolution, the things that defined the French Revolution, at least philosophically, not necessarily how it played out. Liberty was one, and liberty, according to the documents, the rights of man, liberty consists of being able to do anything that does not harm others. Thus, the exercise of the natural right of every man or woman has no bounds other than those guarantee other members of society the enjoyment of these same rights. Now, I'm going to make a caveat to this. As a Christian transhumanist, we do put our own self-limitations on liberty. But I'm talking about liberty in its purest form. In a society that allows people to do what they want, even if I disagree with it. Okay, the next one is equality. The law must be the same for all, whether it protects or punishes. All citizens being equal in its eyes shall be eligible for high office, public position, and employment according to their ability and without other distinctions that of their own virtues and talent. Okay, so liberty, equality, and then fraternity. Now this one's a little bit more nebulous, at least when I read a lot of the French literature. But at least from what I'm thinking, fraternity suggests that the nation's citizens were bound together in solidarity. It combined nationalism with love and a concern for one's fellow citizens. And then I take, obviously, because the French Revolution came after the American Revolution, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And of course, we understand that when the American document of liberty, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence was written, America had slaves. So obviously everybody they didn't consider everybody equal, and yet here's this document saying all men are created equal.
And women couldn't vote.
And women couldn't vote. Exactly. So we had a document that philosophically was beautiful, but in practicality didn't apply to everybody. Does anyone have anything they want to chime in before we continue? Okay.
Yeah, one thought.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just for kicks, while we're talking about theories of liberty, I think it's worth throwing out there the idea that there are two approaches, at least two approaches to liberty. The definition offered here is what some people classify as a negative account of liberty, and that doesn't mean it's a bad account. It means that it's liberty defined in terms of what you can't do, which is maybe to oppress others or to hurt others or to, enter their space, so to speak. There's also an account of liberty that people classify as a positive account of liberty, which is the idea that you are only ever truly free or only ever truly have liberty to the extent that you are actually empowered. So a person who's lying on the side of the road and bleeding to death because maybe she tripped and fell into some spikes on the side of the road. Nobody did it to her. She just tripped and fell. But nobody's doing anything to her. She, by a negative account of liberty, she has liberty. She's free because nobody's doing anything to her. But by a positive account of liberty, she doesn't have liberty because she doesn't have power. And to truly have liberty, in this case, would require somebody to help her.
Okay, I like what you just said, but that's exactly why I like this French framing of liberty, equality, and fraternity. I think you are correct. I think you cannot have liberty without the other two. I think liberty cannot stand by itself without the other two. And this is why I led off with these three, because I think technology as a force of good need this framework to work properly. Because you just can't roll out technology and just expect it to improve our lives unless it's within a framework that says this is what I wanted to do for these people. And this is why I started out with this framework. But I agree with you. If you're just taking liberty, this definition of liberty by itself, you're right. That's insufficient. But this definition of liberty with the other two, I think gives it a more robust meaning. Would anybody else like to chime in or push back on that?
Also, in terms of positive versus negative rights, you have the two framings that anything not forbidden is allowed versus anything not allowed is forbidden.
In theology, that's called the regulative principle.
Yep.
Right. And again, I'm just looking for the broadest definition I can. And I'm not saying that if someone has a religious framework they put on top of this, it's different for them. But I think what we're finding, especially in the United States, is people want to put a religious framework on liberty for everybody. And, you know, they want to put a religious framework on equality for everybody, or fraternity for everybody. What does it mean to be someone's brother, or, you know, to help someone, or, you know, and the problem with that is who gets to define what the religious framework is. So a Baptist and a Catholic may have two different ideas of what liberty is, for example, or a Unitarian and a Catholic, or Unitarian and Southern Baptist. So I'm kind of trying to take it from the broadest perspective, and then we can narrow it. So let me continue. Okay, now I'm going to break it down and try to squeeze technology into this in each definition. So liberty, and I put basic income, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Our freedom is a direct result of our ability to do things that don't just involve survival. Technology can free us to pursue things that make us truly happy. And I've got a little picture of voting. In our country, for hundreds of years, vast groups of people have been disenfranchised to vote. And now we're getting to the point where our technology is giving people the ability to vote who may not have had the ability to vote before. And I'm talking about mail-in voting. We haven't gotten to the point where we can do electronic voting yet, which I think that's coming. But I think the possibility is there. We should be able to have 100% participation in voting if a person wants to vote with the technology we have right now. Now, let me continue on this just a little bit, because I mentioned basic income. One of the things that our country is struggling with is income inequality. And if any of you have ever been poor for any length of time, you understand when you are poor, you are not free. You just can't make the decisions that you really want to make. Everything is constricted as to how much you can make, how much you have. You know, can I pay rent? Can I afford food? So I think, again, with the advent of the technology we have, and the fact, for example, in Europe, there's some places that have 3-day work weeks. And I also want to point out that since the COVID virus has hit, working from home has become much more possible because of technology. Now, where does basic income come in? Basic income says everyone should make a certain amount, no matter what. Everyone should get a flat rate that keeps them from sinking into poverty. And again, that lends to freedom. That lends to being able to not have to make decisions solely based on money, not to be able to choose jobs solely based on, and being able to be free to be able to explore other options. And again, with the advent of technology, now I can take coding classes from my home. I can learn a language from my home. I can work from my home. And there's that potentiality to give people much more freedom than they have now. Does anyone want to chime in and talk about this?
Well, we'll comment that at present there are still some professions that pretty much have to be done with you there. Although that with you present, although that may change in time with as technology improves. If we have robots doing more of the in-person work.
Right, exactly. Construction work. There's certain things that are still require a hands-on capability. But again, as we evolve as a society, that may end up changing. Now, what I think is never going to change is the role of the artisan. I think that, you know, no matter what technology we end up having, there will always be a place for the person who creates something with their hands. Now, I know some people will disagree. Well, if a robot can make a chair, I don't know. I kind of feel like that there's always going to be a place for that artisan. Now, you know, will technology get to the point where a robot can make a movie? I don't know. I don't think so. Again,
They already write sports articles.
Well, I've read some of those articles, but now it may get to the point where you can't tell the difference. But
I've watched some pretty bad movies too.
Well, true. If you're talking about Sharknado level directing, yeah, I guess a computer could do that.
What I think about this, I think that one of the reasons for the appeal of basic income is that it actually does tick off some of those boxes that you're talking about in a way that a lot of other proposals don't, right? Like, so if you say, okay, everyone's going to get a basic income, it kind of works almost like insurance, right? And so one of the reasons that's appealing is because it's not it doesn't feel like a handout. It feels like you're establishing freedom, liberty, equality. Everyone gets the same amount, right? That's the basic premise. And fraternity, like this is all, you know, like we as a society are doing this for our members, right? It seems like it fits those things in a way that maybe some of the ways we deal with hardship and poverty don't necessarily. And I think that's why it has such this idea has such appeal in certain areas, is because it does seem to be a way to take care of a lot of these problems, but not make people feel like they are less than or unequal or of a different group of people, you know, something like that.
Right. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, what does this have to do with fighting fascism? If you remember the history of fascism, especially in Germany, and I'm not going to speak to Italy directly because we have an Italian in the audience who can speak more directly to Mussolini's reign. But in Hitler's Germany, what drove fascism? The collapse of the German economy after World War I. People were starving. People had no money. They were humiliated. And here comes Hitler saying, I can make you great again. Sound familiar? I can make you great. I can make Germany great again. We don't have to live humiliated where our money is worth nothing. And this kind of economic, you know, deprivation drives authoritarianism. I mean, when Trump was running for office, he went to the coal miners and said, I promise I'll bring your coal jobs back. They never came back, by the way. But even the promise of it was enough. Had we had basic income, I'd be convinced that Trump couldn't have had as much tread as he did. This kind of takes the teeth out of authoritarianism because it takes one of those tools. You know, I'm taking over because I want to make your life better. Your life is miserable. I can make it better. Only I can make it better. So that's one thing. So let's talk about equality. And when I say equality, I'm going to use the word information. I want you to stay with me here. Good information helps us know what's going on and helps us take action faster when we see injustice. Now stay with me. Everybody remember that scene from the Civil Rights era? When in Alabama they would sick dogs on, they had a children's march. in Alabama, and one of the sheriffs decided it's a good idea to sick dogs on children. These pictures went viral. All over the world, people started seeing hoses being turned on women and children, dogs being let loose, and it horrified people.
That was definitely a case where the greater freedom of information.
So you can cut both.
Transformation faster than you would have in a country where information was tightly controlled.
Right. In a fascistic society, that's why they control information. That's why you see in China, they control information. They punish companies that give out bad information. But because of the ubiquitousness of technology, pictures are still coming out of Hong Kong, for example, about protesters being beaten. Information is still coming out about the Uyghurs getting sent to concentration camps. Equality only comes when you have information that tells us what's going on and how we can fix inequality. Would anybody like to comment on that or say something?
So, I mean, I think at this point we sort of come up against a dilemma here, because every side is going to say, well, I say side, but like if you've got a political party, every political party is going to say they have the most accurate information. And each political party is going to say that our particular information is so clear and so rational that anybody who disagrees is either evil or insane, or they just don't know any better, but you can't trust them, or they're just stupid. Like, so you have that on both sides. So you have to ask, okay, so when you've got like no arbiter to sort through this information, and you've got like experts that each side has its experts that are swearing that their arguments are so rational that there are no other conclusions. Who decides? How do you determine what the truth is? I guess some people call that like the postmodern dilemma.
Would anybody like to answer that?
Well, not answer it. I'm just going to chime in and agree with it too. You've also got, we're in an era of information overload where you can actually line up plenty of data to support just about any position and then layer it with interpretation. And the same thing is true with photos. I mean, both sides of any argument will take a picture, and there's an art of taking a picture that supports your point of view, and it can be the same situation, but people taking it from different sides. I do think that is the postmodern dilemma.
I think this is why it's so important to love our enemies. I think because everybody's view is partial. We all have evidence filters, which I regard as sinful, but we all have them. We should all fight against our own evidence filters. But one way to do that is to reach out and see things through somebody else's eyes. I mean, every public policy decision needs to incorporate a whole range of views. So good public policy always feels like a compromise, and extremism is always bad public policy. We need to come together as a people and integrate the best ideas from every group and avoid the extremism. And so good information is really broad-based information where you look at conflicting and contradictory ideas. Anybody can build an evidence filter. Anybody can take an awkward-looking photo of Nick Sandman, for instance, that went everywhere. That was fake news. And this is what information needs to be verified and true information. And that's what what I think Christian transhumanism offers.
Right.
And,
That's. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it also part of it is to what extent is the information flow able to go peer to peer and not just through centralization, because centralization allows much more control of what information other people receive.
Well,
You basically firewall off anybody who has unpopular views, then the views don't get seen.
So I think there's a equivalent idea here in if you think about software, you think about like open source software, right? A lot of the big things that run many processes in our society are built on open source software, and the idea is that everyone can kind of interrogate that software and see how it's working, and that freedom of information is really important. But it's not a kind of freedom of information where I see something on there and I just tweak it unilaterally, right? Like I just start circulating my version of WordPress or whatever. I could do that, but I actually need that. If I want to change something about WordPress, I have to go through this process of submitting a pull request and all this kind of stuff. And that I think is part of what's missing. Like, we need those collaborative things. We also need the ability to check them, right? Like, we need the transparency to check them, but we do want systems that can help us, like, fact check, that can help us clarify our information. We just all want to be able to validate those systems from any different angle.
Yeah, Eric S. Raymond, who's one of the founders of the open source movement, calls that some kind of law, but it's the idea is that the number of bugs in an open source software application is inversely proportional to the number of eyeballs on that. And so that's the collaborative principle. You can only have that kind of openness. It only works if you have a critical mass of community who are engaged and willing and moving in the same direction. Open source software with 3 people doesn't work.
Right. Accessibility to information is important. Education is also important. Now, I'll give you an example. When George Floyd was killed by the police, I actually had a congregant in my congregation who saw the video, saw he was being choked out. His response to the video was, well, he shouldn't have resisted arrest. Well, that didn't deserve, and I asked him, so he deserves a death penalty for that? Because he resisted arrest a little, he deserved to be choked out for 8 minutes. So this is where even good, facts matter. And I am all for putting out as much information as possible, but people have to be able to discern good facts from bad facts. People have to be able to know, if we're talking about climate change, that if someone says, well, it was cold last year, that's not a fact. That's a statement. If someone says, well, someone told me they had dynamite in the World Trade Center, again, that's not a fact. This is why this whole QAnon thing is starting to grow. I was talking to one of my friends, and he was telling me, what do you think about the QAnon thing? I said, let me get this straight. A group of pedophiles have been running the government for 20 years or however long it's been, and no one's caught them.
But we found the emails. We found the emails.
Right. So, this is where good information, this is why people are pressing Facebook, Google, Twitter to be better filters of information. And people are pushing back. They're saying, oh, you're censoring me. No. we're getting rid of bad information. All information is not equal, mind you. This is why I said good information. And now if you want to have an argument what's good and bad, I think that we as a reasonable society can come to a conclusion that there are certain things that are preposterous and certain things that are not. And I think if we don't get to that point, that's where we fall into fascistic territory, because then you have, you know, where Germany was saying that Jews were running the banks and stealing money, and all this horrible things start to come out and people start to believe it. Let me move on to our last point, which is fraternity, awareness. Technology can bring us closer together as a species when we realize that we have more in common than what separates us. This is where I think Christianity can really lend a hand. If, and this is important, we emphasize that we are all created in the image of God. Because once you start to say that, once you start to believe that, once that starts to become real, then how can you treat someone who's made in the image of God less than yourself? How can this is why I push back against, for example, certain forms of evangelicalism, especially Reformed evangelicalism. And I'm an evangelical, so I can say this. But in Reformed theology, all men are garbage. They're all tainted with sin. They're all tainted with original sin. And once you start doing that, what I have found, it's as easy to mistreat someone who you don't think is worth much anyway. And this is why I say a proper view of Christianity that says everyone has worth, everyone has merit, that everyone should be treated equally because you are made in God's image, can help build fraternity. But you have to have that awareness. You have to bring people to the awareness that you are worth something because you are God's creation. Would anybody like to chime in on that before I finish?
Amen.
So, in conclusion, to fight fascism, we must engage technology in a way that is both accessible and understandable so that we can leverage it against the forces that seek to oppress us. And that is my presentation. Would anybody like to add or detract or kick off the board or whatever happens at this point?
I would comment something that I got from one of Martin Luther King's sermons. He was defining the three types of love, and that you love somebody because you like them. You love somebody because you're attracted to them, and you love somebody because God loves them. And that last is the supreme form.
Yes, I think it's important to realize that it's not enough, at least I'm talking about from a Christian point of view, it's not enough to say you're a follower of Jesus. You actually have to follow that up by saying, and because I'm a follower of Jesus, I believe you have worth. You have worth because God has granted you worth, not because you agree with me philosophically or theologically, but because you have worth as God's creation. Now, again, some of my more evangelical brothers or sisters would disagree with that. Now, they would never say, well, no, I guess some would actually say that. the only way you can get to the point as a human being where you can separate a child from his parents is to be able to ascribe less worth to those people than to your own people. Because as I told someone when we were talking about this, if you got a speeding ticket, can I go to your house and take your kids away until you pay that ticket? Of course not. That would be barbaric. So why can I take your child away if you violate a similar law like that? You know, it really is a matter of how you frame and this kind of extends to how we deal with our prison system, how we deal with people who are, for example, hooked on drugs. This cascades through a lot of other things. So, and in this sense, technology can be either a great equalizer or a great oppressor. Technology can help us see more of the good in ourselves or echo some more bad traits in ourselves. And I would hope to do the former rather than the latter.
Something that I think about sometimes in terms of the question of equality and human value and so forth. You know, if you had a Bitcoin wallet from early days of Bitcoin, right? And, you know, maybe it had, you know, a few dozen Bitcoin associated with it, you know, that might have been worth just a few dollars at the time. But over time, right, that might have become worth thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And I think what we're saying in the Christian framework is that people are the kind of thing that has this immeasurable ultimate value, which we do not currently, you know, is not currently reflected in prices, right? And so, you know, we have to deal with, you know, the practical concerns of the world around us, just like we do with storing Bitcoin and so forth. But when we do that, knowing that the price of this, the value of this, is ultimately going to be probably unimaginably higher than our current valuation, then we do that differently, and we think of it differently, because we don't really know what the upper limit of that is going to be. And I think that's the case with persons, right? We don't really know what the upper limit of value actually could be. And so when we, you know, C.S. Lewis uses this idea, we walk around, our neighbors or coworkers are these, you know, in his framework, they're either these future demons or future shining gods and goddesses, right? And like, that's the destiny of these things that we're dealing with. So I don't know, that to me, like, that's one way of thinking about it in terms of trying to get outside of some of the definitional questions that come up with that stuff.
Right. I think that that's a good point, Micah, that you don't know the worth of somebody until you actually give them the opportunity to live into their worth. Or live their truest self. I think a perfect example is the movie Hidden Figures, where these African-American women were brilliant mathematicians, but they had to claw and struggle just to get the same thing white guys got naturally, you know, just to be recognized. And you shouldn't have a society like that. You should be able to pick. And unfortunately, I see this in the church. I asked one person, have you ever seen a priest in a wheelchair leading a church? No, I've never seen one. No, that's kind of tragic, because there are probably lots of people in wheelchairs who are brilliant preachers or brilliant theologians, and we're missing out on that as a society. Now we now have the technology to be able to incorporate more people. But we have to push for that kind of equality that says maybe 100 years ago, if you were blind, you know, maybe you can make some clothing and that's about it. You couldn't do anything else. But now we have the ability to incorporate you almost fully into society because of the technology. So in that sense, you know, we fight against the fascistic term of trying to make everyone the same. And we fight for the ability to make everyone equal, which is different.
I just want to jump in here. We're over an hour, so I want to try to keep these things concise. This is great, and Omar, you really overdid I think what I did the previous time in terms of preparation of materials. So I think that's great. And we can hang out for a little while or whatever, but I just want to kind of give people the opportunity to sign off and so forth. So yeah, thanks for doing this. This is great.
Good to see you all.
See you, Lincoln.
Thank you, Lincoln.
Good to see you all, and that was a good presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Yes, thank you very much. I actually got some good stuff out of that. You know, some really good stuff. So that was, I appreciate what you were saying.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, and so next month we will do it first Thursday, and Jonathan will lead us in a discussion. I think he's doing consciousness, so that'll be great. And
Wow, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. That'll be.
I don't even understand consciousness, so I'm going to be real interested.
I don't think
to see what
anybody
he
does. I don't.
and it just blows my mind to think that one day an AI may achieve consciousness. I don't even know what bucket to put that in. You know where that would go as far as you know, just what would I do with something like that? That would be something that I mean, I'm not afraid of it. I mean, it's some of my colleagues are afraid. You know, well, if you make a machine that, hey, you know, there are things that we don't understand, and that's okay. You know.
Yeah.
You know, I've just started wrapping my mind around the multiverse concept. So
yeah.
I don't even know where to put that in my Christianity yet. So
I don't think anybody's figured out those things. Like, nobody knows how to conceptualize the multiverse or consciousness, or these are all the things that haven't yet been fit in the human brain.
Yeah, I was watching the Avengers Endgame with my son, and he was asking me, so where's God in the multiverse? I said, son, I don't even know. You got me on that one, because I see, this is where we almost hit the limits of our understanding. You know, you just don't know. I don't know. I told him, I said, I don't even know how I would conceptualize having another world where I exist. Don't know. You know, but if it's proven to be correct, then I got to figure it out. You know?
Right.
I mean, I don't pretend it doesn't exist, which is what some of my colleagues who are evangelical want to do. You know, you can't tell science it's not existing because it doesn't fit your framework. That's what they did with Galileo.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That's exactly it. We have to deal with the stuff that actually is there, rather than prematurely like thinking we know how to classify everything and using that. And that's a discussion, because I think we've seen some religious groups come out with statements on AI that prematurely declare certain things to be impossible. It's like, well, how do you know? You know, like what is your source of knowledge that this is an impossibility here? You know.
Yeah,
So,
just because you're afraid of something doesn't make it impossible.
yeah.
Just because you can't fit it within your pre-Reformation framework, or whatever, you know, whatever framework you're operating off of,
Yeah.
your pre-Enlightenment framework, I can't. It's, you know, it's maddening, because what it does is it just makes Christianity look foolish. It just, oh, Christianity can't accept. Well, yeah, sometimes we can't. I mean, when I get, you know, and again, it's a struggle. I know it's a struggle for people, but you have to accept that you don't know everything about God's universe. You just don't. And it's okay. He didn't write everything in the book. See, this is the other thing, you know. Well, that's not in the Bible. Yeah. I don't think that God's going to put multiverse theory in the Bible. Why would he do it? What would be the purpose of it?
Right.
You know, what would that help anybody in either testament? You know?
Right.
So yeah, there are lots of things he left out. You know, I in fact I was talking to a confirmation class about Ouija boards, and they asked me, you know, so what do you think of that? I said, look, a Ouija board is opening a door where you don't know who's on the other side. It's just that simple. Once you play with it, you don't know who you're talking to. This is why God, in God's wisdom, tells us to stay away from this stuff. It's not because he's being mean. It's because our minds are limited and we can only handle so many things. You know, if you want to blow your mind and see all the possibilities of, you know, when Paul talks about going to a third heaven, there's your multiverse right there.
Yeah. Yeah, something.
There's something. You know, when Jesus descends to hell, who knows what that is? It's only mentioned once in the Bible, but it's there and it's part of our creed. We don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the Hollywood director to do a movie on it. I am waiting actually for the Hollywood director to do a movie of someone going to hell and liberating someone. I mean, to me, that would be a most fascinating movie, because again, there's so many things in the Bible that I taught a class once on things that make you scratch your head in the Bible, and one of the things we talked about was the Witch of Endor. I can't explain the Witch of Endor. I just can't. Now, you can pretend it didn't exist. That's what evangelicals, this didn't. No, it really happened. I don't know what's happening, but it happened. I don't understand it. I don't understand.
There's weirder things in the Bible than we're prepared for.
Oh yeah, like if you look in Genesis where God says, okay, we got to kick Adam out because if he eats from the tree of life, he's going to live forever. Huh? Really? What does that even mean? So there's a chance that Adam could have eaten from the tree of life and he would have just been stuck in the... I don't know. It's just there. And it's just weird, little weird stuff that gives you a glimpse of something else that's going on in God's universe that you cannot understand. And I think the problem is with AI, and that's why I'm so glad this organization exists, is that Christians have limited what they think God's universe is capable of.
Yeah. Well, I gotta go.
I'm sorry to talk your ear off. I'm sorry my presentation took so long. I was only trying to be as good as you. So just blame yourself.
By the way, Steve.
What's that?
By the way, speaking of Ouija boards, I saw a humorous something on Facebook. There's somebody using the Ouija board, and it spells out, "We've been trying to contact you about your auto warranty."
That's about what you'd expect, yeah.
Now that's funny. Now somebody should make a commercial of that. You know, someone using a Ouija board. By the way, you still owe $100 on your cable bill. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. It was great.
Good night.